All right. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this session of PensamENT. My name is Mike Stanevich, and I work on Life Bio Best project, an EU project on bio-waste implementation and policy. And so I think that with everyone here, we'll just go ahead and get started. I have a short introduction to introduce today's presenter. But first of all, thank you so much to everyone who is here and for your participation and involvement in this webinar in the PensamENT series. PensamENTs are online sessions organized by Fundació ENT to debate and reflect on topics of interest of today related to the environment. PensamENT sessions are about 1 hour long and held periodically, often monthly. The topic that will be discussed today is bio-waste management in population-dense areas, with the title, The Challenges and Opportunities of Bio-Waste Management in New York City. A little bit of context, although I'm sure we're all somewhat familiar with New York City and its size and its place in the United States, perhaps. The Big Apple faces unique challenges in the implementation of bio-waste collection and treatment that have made its rollout of organics recycling an arduous and long-winded process. New York City is home to about 8.5 million people, the largest and most densely populated city in the United States. In the city, around 800 languages are spoken, making it one of the most linguistically diverse places in the world. And on top of that, more than a third of New York City residents are born outside of the United States. So with this diversity of languages and cultures, outreach campaigns must be specifically tailored to the local reality. And beyond environmentalists, among those interested in the composting program are the local fauna, which include rats, raccoons, and in very rare cases, bears. Leading the efforts in New York City is the Department of Sanitation. And these recent advancements include the naming of Kathleen Corradi as the rat czar, as well as the passing of legislation to make in the New York City Council to make organic collection mandatory. And perhaps some of these updates will be further detailed by today's presenter. So with that, I'd like to introduce Andrew Hoyles, who is the Senior Program Manager for Organics Outreach at the New York City Department of Sanitation. Andrew will present for about 30 to 35 minutes, and the remaining time will be dedicated to questions and debate. And if anyone has a question, feel free to hold on to it until the end of the session. And you can either raise your hand or write it into the chat box, and then I'll read it aloud for everyone. All right, so with that, I'd like to pass the floor to Andrew. Thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to see you. And thank you to everyone who's here.
Thanks, Mike. And hello, everyone. As Mike said, my name's Andrew Hoyles. I'm the Senior Manager of Composting Outreach and Education at the Department of Sanitation in New York City. I work on curbside composting service, which I'll explain how it looks in New York City. And my focus is particularly for the residential sector. And I'll get into a little bit of what that actually means when we're talking about waste in New York City, because of the look and the feel and the built environment of the city means that there's a lot of waste from a lot of different entities or generators of that waste. Let me share my screen. Give me 1 second. Okay. Okay. Great. So composting in New York City, what does it look like? I'll love to dive into as much as I can. I only have about 35 minutes to talk, but then we can do questions, and I hope I'll be able to address the questions and the areas of concern or the areas of opportunity that folks might have as they're interested in considering learning about organics diversion efforts that municipalities are taking on right now. So as Mike was saying, New York City, right, looking at it from the lens of the built environment, 10,000 feet above the air, we see a city that's very diverse, both in where the folks are from, the people who are actually from the city have come from, what the built environment looks like, meaning what the housing stock looks like, what the the regional and global importance of the city, the institutions and agencies that are in the city. There are a lot, right? We're a worldwide city, but also we're very much of a local city, and we have to have programs that work for all of the residents, visitors, both transient and permanent folks who are in the geographic area of New York City at the time. So I think it's important to kind of drill down on that type of housing stock to understand it as I explain the kind of program that is curbside composting here in New York City. We just saw that image of Central Park in Midtown Manhattan, but you'll see in these kind of closer snapshots of New York City housing, we have multi-unit family dwellings. They could have 500 to 1,000 units, all with families inside of them. We could have single family homes, such as on the upper right, which house a family or two. There can be mixed use buildings such as commercial on the bottom and then residential dwellings on the top. And then also tightly knit community neighborhoods where there are apartment buildings, small apartment buildings with 1 to 9 units or so abutted against each other. This is just New York City. This is just what the city looks like. This is how residents find themselves day to day. And at the department, we have to have a program that matches, that can service all different types, that's both fair and equitable and costly, and also can manage the waste that is in this type of a city, this layout of a city. With the exception of businesses, DSNY collects from the 8.6 million citizens, the households, all of the schools, and government agencies and nonprofit organizations. So that would nonprofit organizations and religious institutions. So there's a lot of waste. And a bit on the agency itself, New York City Department of Sanitation, we are, we take credit for being the largest municipal sanitation department in the U.S. There are close to 10,000 sanitation workers, uniform sanitation workers, who are responsible for managing the cleaning, collection, snow management, and regulation of waste within New York City. So I did want to allow that framing to exist, that the program that we have also is at the scale that we need, right? Sometimes I've spoken with municipalities of, a fraction of the size, and they wonder, how do we do this type of stuff? Well, we have a very large workforce, and we have a real mandate to make sure that the city is clean, safe, that we manage the waste and recyclables that are put on the street every single day by residents, even if there is things like snow or bad weather, or if the city is growing or the waste stream changes, right? We still have to manage that material that's set out. So in the time that I have, I was hoping to be able to just give an background on the waste that's in New York City's. What does it look like? What's the waste stream? What's in our waste characterization? Then provide some context for the history of how organics waste has been managed in New York City. So we didn't just start with an organics program, but how do we get here and where are we going to? And then I wanted to explain a little bit about what our actual curbside composting service for residents looks like, so that individuals could have an understanding of how does this program differ from a program I'm familiar with somewhere else. And then specifically how we target residents and our audience members, or our customers, you could even think of them as, through outreach and public information. So we look at our waste characterization. This is the 2017 New York City Waste Characterization Study. It's the last time that the city of New York has collected a residential aggregate study of waste that is discarded or thrown out, to see what is inside of it. We're working on one for 2025. But this is the most recent and most accurate depiction. So, I mean, the one thing I think that strikes me, right, there's a lot of this waste, right? 34% of the material that's discarded or thrown out is suitable for composting. That includes food scraps, food soil, paper, yard waste. This material is perfectly compostable or perfectly suitable for anaerobic digestion, which is one of our approaches to managing this waste, but it's not being collected by that this segment isn't being collected for composting. The other fractions that are important to note, 34% being residential curbside recyclables. So these are a portion that is suitable for recycling in a program that does exist citywide, but is still being discarded as waste. So still a long ways to go on the recycling side of things as well. I think just naming that, because sometimes municipalities or regions try to focus on, let's get recycling up first and then we can do this other program. Well, I think that we've taken the stance of, you need to work on a full program that looks at all types of resources that can be recovered, not just one until you perfect it, so to speak, and then move on to the next one. We'll always be lagging behind the goals that we want to set for ourselves if we do so. And then the other divertible materials includes things like harmful products or electronic waste, things that we have special programs for to collect. And then this large other, that's things like that can't be recycled in New York City or in the region. Those might be diapers or personal care and consumer products, construction material, things like that. So there's a lot of this waste, right? We in the city of New York, what you saw on the slide, about 10,000 tons of material each day is collected for waste, right? That's a lot. And so we're trying to divert these fractions to beneficial use. We're aware of the greenhouse gas emissions that organics waste contributes to, if it's breaking down as methane in the landfill setting, if it's not composted, the quality of life issues that climate issues are causing, the quality of life issues that just sheer amounts of food waste at the curb can cause, regarding bags of trash being torn open, and animals and pests and things like that that can proliferate or live off of such large amounts of discards. And there's just also beneficial ways of managing organic waste, right? We can have a beneficial product, the finished compost, energy through anaerobic digestion, or mulch from woody waste and woody debris, and not have a waste product instead, right? So this is really one of the ways of starting to review, like, why is New York City doing this? Well, there's many beneficial reasons why we should be doing this. It's taken some time, though, for us to really figure out what the specific plan is going to be and how we're going to get there. This slide shows close to 30 years of attempts or strategies or programs that we at the Department of Sanitation have done to get closer to a full citywide curbside composting or organics management plan. You see on the far left side, it starts when the city of New York initiated fall leaf and yard waste collections. So seasonally in the fall, when all of the fall leaves are coming down and residents rake those leaves up, we would start to collect them on one borough of the city within Staten Island and manage that material that doesn't need to be sent to landfill. And you kind of see over the course of the years trying to have similar programs like that, where there are management of Christmas trees that are something in another seasonal material, or other fall leaf collections as it expanded and grew over the years, because this is kind of a normal practice. It's seasonal, so you can set your watch to it, so to speak. You can manage the collection of this material, and then we can make the finished compost from it. But you'll also see some of these moments in time are hit with the reality of budget constraints, where the programs would be suspended or paused and then reanimated, restarted. As we get towards the end of the 2010s, that's when Department of Sanitation, due to New York City Council or legislation, started organics collection as pilots within the city of New York. And these pilots were supposed to really say, like, where can New York City go with these type of programs? I don't think anybody started to think like, okay, this pilot is going to turn into a full citywide curbside collection just yet, because I think a lot of where the public was at was still finding out about how to compost, or learning about compost, or learning about what these programs are really and how they fit into managing waste within the city. I think that was both on the residential side of things and also on the, the management side of things for the agencies itself. It's worth noting at this point in time, within the US, municipalities more on the west coast of the country, and in Canada, or some, I would say, you know, cities that manage yard waste more regularly had been in existence for about 20 or so years at this point. So New York City was starting relatively late in the game for managing organics collection at this point when we started our pilot programs. We were expanding these pilot programs in start out in small neighborhoods, uh, single family homes and small apartment buildings where the residents tend to manage their waste themselves. And then we started to expand into other parts of the city, where there'd be more of those high-rise buildings, and more complicated, so to speak, housing stock layouts, where buildings have staff or have specific management that entails their waste, right? That manage their waste. And we got until about 2019 when organics collection was about half the city. Now here you see here 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic started, and organics collection was suspended. This was due to one of the budget saving, the cost saving measures that many city agencies and many municipalities around the world faced, as city managers panicked to find a way to how do we divert resources to managing this pandemic that we are now in. It's worth noting that when organics collection was in half of the city, this was in many different styles. Collection didn't look the same everywhere. That's what I'm trying to say. But it was a program that wasn't about half of the city, both by the number of uh, community neighborhoods that it covered and also the population that it covered. Within the last few years, as we've crawled out of the more drastic moments of the pandemic, curbside composting has started to return, both as a way to manage the waste, but also as a way for the city to try and look at how we're managing putrescible waste in general, right? Curbside composting is an important program for residents, but also the city of New York is taking steps to manage waste on the residential side by supporting either rulemaking or supporting legislation around containerization of waste, and to battle the issues of rats and odors and things like that that are causing, that have been a problem for too long, and that they're finally the focus a little bit more of these programs and taking them a little bit more seriously in some types of ways, so that they're not solely for individuals who only want to compost, but also for people who are concerned about the rodents and concerned about what's going on with climate. So that was a lot. Kind of, I'm sure there'll be some questions on this in a couple of minutes, but I wanted to make sure people understood that the Department of Sanitation, in those years that we've been working on curbside composting, we've always had a sort of mix of solutions towards managing the waste. It hasn't always been, large city vehicles driving down the street collecting waste. We've actually started firmly with backyard and home composting as a strategy for individuals managing their organic waste that they themselves generate at their home. We did workshops on backyard composting and worm bin composting, even using small totes to compost the food scraps that one would have in their home. We also supported community composting and drop-off composting, or composting that takes place much more on a neighborhood level, where there might be a garden space that has volunteers who are committed to managing compost via neighborhood drop-offs, and they actually use that finished compost for their community garden or for beautifying their own neighborhood. So it's very much a local approach, in my backyard, kind of a manifesto or belief that if they can manage the waste that they have in their neighborhood and their community, then they'll beautify their neighborhood that way. As well, as curbside composting, that being the program that we know is rolling out now and that I'm really focusing on, because while these other programs are great, the scale of New York that we've been, that I've mentioned, it really requires a robust strategy that is able to be the same service in every single neighborhood, several times a week. Um, and whether it's rainy, snowy, or any other type of issues that could become a detriment to collections from one of these smaller scale operations. So this little area, this is where we're really focusing at now, and the city of New York also still supports the efforts that go on here. This is just some of the ways that to depict what in New York City, what some of these programs look like. And the sort of smaller and community scale. They're both educational activities, and talking to residents why composting is important. Letting folks know that the organic waste, the bio waste that they have actually has value to it, right? It's not waste unless it's wasted. It's something that a lot of the educators speak to. Giving technical assistance or providing the knowledge and understanding of how something goes from a banana peel to finished compost. And I think that that's really important as cities move to these programs. It's the assumption of like complete understanding of the recycling process, I think, or the composting process, I think can't be taken for granted, because if someone's been discarding something for forever, and then all of a sudden municipal managers say, no, this is a valuable product, you have to work against that understanding that, well, I've been throwing this away all along, why do I have to compost it now? And then also we've supported public food scrap drop-off sites where residents can collect and bring their food scraps, and it's processed at mid-scale sites. This is happening throughout the city. If you go to our website, nyc.gov/drop food scraps, you'll see over 200 locations around the city where residents who do not yet have curbside composting service can collect their food scraps and bring their food scraps, or other compostable material, other organic waste, to be composted by one of these groups. These sites, again, you'll see these aren't city positions, so to speak. These are not city staff collecting these, but they are supported and funded in some part by the Department of Sanitation. So there's really this large approach, right? We're not assuming that just because we have curbside composting trucks and service rolling out that we have also hit every single part of the city. There are still areas where curbside composting might be in one neighborhood, but also many people who live in a high-rise building, they still like to drop off their compost because they get to talk to somebody. It's a normal practice that they've developed with their family, and putting their waste in a bin has kind of made that practice a little bit less friendly, so to speak, or a little bit less of a community practice that they've learned and adopted themselves. This is one of our trucks. So kind of clearly, I'm just looking at the difference between community members and then kind of what our service looks like, right? But the difference of scale is really important here. Curbside composting for Department of Sanitation is the collection specifically of food scraps, food soil paper, and yard waste on a set schedule each week in the neighborhoods that have it. If it grows, it goes is sort of one of the other sayings we have so that people can understand the program. And that's also, I think, important for folks to understand, because we're in a program right now that's really geared towards bio waste, that is food soil paper, and yard waste, not necessarily looking into things like diapers or human waste or other municipalities around the world who have organics programs. They do definitely approach those type of discards. But in the city of New York, we are focused on what resources are the simplest to, or what materials are the simplest to convey and educate to such a wide population and such a diverse population. The service started in a formal way in 2013 when we started in these small residential neighborhoods that I mentioned in 2 boroughs, in the Bronx and Staten Island, for individuals who are familiar with those parts of the city. These neighborhoods where the service started, the residents managed their waste. So the person we were educating was also on this program and informing about how this program works, was also the individual, more likely than not, who had to put their food waste at the curb each night of the week. That's important to note because the service expanded to 28 until 2018, and kind of in the process where we're in now, where we're expanding to so much of the city where we have to now talk to tenants who live in high rises who are also very much disconnected from their waste. They maybe put it down a chute, or they put it in a waste area and then they're done with it. They don't touch their waste any more than that. So that's where we are at now, and that's why we have to do also a lot of education to building tenants, building management, building staff, building supers. I mentioned the spring 2020 service cut due to COVID, and also the service resumed briefly in a sign-up program. But I think what's really important, really all that matters, is as of last fall in 2022, curbside composting began in Queens. The entire borough of Queens, a little over 2.2 million residents received service. It's been a successful launch. There's captured lots and lots of yard waste from the program, but also catching lots and lots of food waste from individuals. We've also now made yard waste capture mandatory. So leaf and yard waste will be mandatory as of the end of this month, beginning July. Service we'll be expecting residents setting out their yard waste, and that's a way to kind of guarantee and ensure that there's material that we can collect from the public. This has always been a voluntary program to this point, and that's really important. I realize I didn't mention that now, but these have been voluntary programs where you get what you ask for, so to speak. Some individuals have participated because they care about composting, because it makes their life easier managing the waste, because they are worried about rodents or other issues. And some individuals have decided not to participate because they don't have to. But now we are starting our first initial rule that we have, which allows for us to collect yard waste from the public. Additionally, in the last month, some other updates have come across that I should mention here, which is the city council, which is the governance of the city, have passed a bill, a very strong bill, to mandate curbside composting in the city of New York. And the mandate follows the same timeline that's depicted here with the citywide service expansion, where Brooklyn, the borough of Brooklyn, about 3.5 million New Yorkers, will have service starting October 2nd of this year. The two other boroughs, Staten Island and the Bronx, will have service beginning in the spring of next year, in March. And then Manhattan, the final borough, maybe the toughest nut to crack in this, with the densest housing stock, will be starting in October of next year. So that's a huge note for this type of services, that we are now going from a program that started in the small residential neighborhoods and had fits and starts, to now having a full schedule of when we're rolling the program out, and planning to be citywide at this time. That's also when, as the legislature states, when the program would be made mandatory effectively, right? When tickets could be written, because everybody in the city has access to the program at that point. The legislation right now, the mayor has not signed it. It just passed, I think, 2 weeks ago, but the mayor has not signed it to be law. But that's where we're at with the residential program and service. So I mentioned a lot of this stuff, but just to reiterate, it includes single-family homes, small apartment buildings, and multi-unit residential buildings. So, and this participation is voluntary at this time, but with the yard waste mandate that just came to be between the times that I was talking with Mike about this presentation and today, this slide became a little bit outdated. But that's exciting, because this is the direction and the speed at which these programs are moving and going. Some bit on the details of the program, then I'll move through. I want to make sure there's time for questions. Composting collection here in New York City is collected on the recycling day. That's helpful for increasing collection efficiencies. You'll see one of our vehicles here. This is a split body truck, as we call it, or a dual bin truck. And you can see from the image, one portion of the vehicle has leaves in there and other organic waste, and the other portion we collect refuse. the garbage that's discarded, right, on the other side of the truck. So that allows the agency to effectively collect both streams at the same time. We also can use these vehicles, these same trucks, right? They're cleaned between shifts, to collect the two recycling streams that we have in New York City, one being metal, glass, plastic, and cartons, and the other being paper on the other side, paper and cardboard. There was a 3-month service pause in the winter. The slide in the very beginning of the presentation that denoted that DSNY manages snow operations. We did have a pause to, as we were scaling this program up, to manage those snow operations, but there won't be further pauses any longer. And there is an impact to regular trash service or recycling service. A question I often get is, okay, so you have a composting program. Does that mean now you've taken away one of the days of trash collection, or you're increasing the frequency? And that's not where the city is at as of today. It's certainly something that's brought up by the governing bodies of New York and by a lot of the policy heads. And it's certainly a good question. Like, when will, for these type of programs to work, right, we should assume that there will be more and more recycling and composting service and less trash service, but we aren't at that point yet. All the services are still the same, at the same frequency that they're offered. We collect any type of food scraps, cooked or uncooked, meat, dairy, any of those types of things, food soiled paper, and leaf and yard waste, right? The residents, we want to make this as easy as possible, so we do use graphics that try to depict as clear as possible what each of these type of items could be: fruits, vegetables, cooked, uncooked, shells, right? And then food soiled paper and yard waste being items that I think are a little bit tricky for folks, because food soiled paper probably wasn't really in the lexicon of most New Yorker day-to-day conversations, but it is still a very important aspect of the waste stream. And how we collect the material is really important as well. Leaf and yard waste can be separated out and placed in the curb in any of these options. When we do this, it's trying to limit the barrier to entry, really. So we give New Yorkers any option, from a clear plastic bag, paper on a leaf bag, a bin that we would provide, or their own bin, to set the material out. You basically just have to set it at the curb, which is how we would collect here in the city of New York. It just has to be there for us to collect, and the sanitation department, when we drive our trucks by, will be the one to collect the material. For food waste, the putrescible waste, the odorous waste, we do request that, and we do require, excuse me, that it's in a rodent-proof latching lid of some type. Department of Sanitation in New York, we have a period of time where we provide these bins for free to the public. Buildings that had multiple units automatically received a brown bin, so that to try to better manage the sort of operation of providing service for the high-rise buildings. And also, since we have had past expansions of service, some residents already had a brown bin, and they can continue to use those. But these bins have wheels, they have latching lids, and they're effectively rodent resistant for those raccoons and rats and other types of pests that might be trying to get at this waste. And we allow residents who don't have one of these bins to use their own, as long as it has a latching lid and is at least it's under 55 gallons in size, and it has to be labeled with a sticker, one of our decals, which are available for free and we give out at outreach events, to explain what the program is. Participation is 1, 2, 3. You collect your food scraps, you separate them out into the correct bin, as you're kind of seeing how we're containerizing the waste here, and then you set out the night before your collection schedule. One other note I just want to name as far as how we're trying to manage and containerize waste is, in New York City, we've changed the set out time rules. Those set out time rules have essentially been pushed back till later in the day. And we've started collecting earlier in the morning. And that's another way to get waste off of the street, to support containerization of waste, whether it's just hard-sided bins or in other collection apparatus. If for folks who've been to New York City, you might see like large piles of bags of trash, and that is something we're moving away from. We're moving away from very aggressively. We've allowed for bins to be set out at as early as 6 p.m. and then anything that's in a bag has to be set out after 8 p.m. So much later in the day. For the individual who really wants their waste to be out and they want to be done with it, then they have the opportunity now to set out at 6 p.m. and then we'll collect as early as 5 in the morning or overnight as well. We manage the material in 2 ways once we've collected it. 2 main industrial processes. The first picture, this is one of our composting facilities in the outer borough of Staten Island. It is a 24-acre composting facility where we manage a lot of material. The materials managed from Staten Island. We use this compost and give it out to outreach activities and greening efforts. And we are also creating anaerobic digestion from the material. The majority of the material that was collected in Queens has been going to anaerobic digestion, one of 2 facilities, the Newtown Creek egg digesters, which we create energy from, and then also a facility that's out of sight of the state, but within the region to create anaerobic digestion and then finished compost from the digestate. The material that we collected, it can come with contaminants, not very much contaminants. The studies we show, it's usually much under 10%, closer to 5 to 7% contaminant. That could be plastic liners and, inorganic material that people have thrown out. We make sure that the facilities that receive all of our organic material have decontaminant processes in place to make sure that pre-screeners, basically, to make sure that we have a consistent material and blend. Just an aerial view of New York City, a map. This is those red dots. Not sure how important this slide is at this moment, but the built environment allows for us to move the material to these waste transfer stations, to then be further processed at composting facilities or AD facilities. Okay. Just one other detail I want to note before we get into the questions, because we have about 20 minutes left, is our community outreach and engagement strategy is multifaceted. We do, have a citywide or a borough-wide mailer to all the residents of a catchment area. So every single individual receives a piece of mail from the Department of Sanitation that announces the program, and it has translated links. We spend a lot on press releases and social media, on targeted outreach and advertisements on social media, on bus ads, Facebook ads, things like that. So the very much the social media that is so critical to communications right now, we are very much a part of that. And then also we have many boots on the ground, so to speak. Neighborhood outreach events and flyering takes place via door-to-door canvassing. In Queens, we touched every single 1 to 9 unit household door. We canvassed the entire borough, and that's our strategy as well for Brooklyn, as we're starting and planning to do the outreach efforts in Brooklyn for the next round of service. This canvassing has been done with uniformed sanitation workers, private vendors that we've brought on board for short-term contractual work, civilian staff such as myself. We're all out there. It's a full effort of getting everyone to talk about the program and being ensured that they know how to participate and start this program. And then we have formal trainings at community board meetings, presentations to staff, that's depicted here in this image, and trainings that we host here at our office spaces. So just trying to make sure every single individual who's available and who wants to participate in the programs can learn how and can understand how. The laws are definitely going to help at this point, because everything before was voluntary, but now we're in this place where legislature will allow it eventually for us to provide tickets to those who choose not to participate. We aren't there as of today, but with the new laws coming into effect, we will be much stronger in those efforts to be able to do that. Literature and signage is translated in the 13 languages that are most commonly spoken here in the city of New York. The city of New York requires by law that there is the top 10 languages are translated, that all outreach resources are available in those languages, and we additionally have 2 other languages that 2 or 3 other languages that we add to that to make sure that we're covering all the different areas in this parts of the city. So, okay, that was a lot. I wanted to make sure there's time for questions, but I want to thank you all for hopefully for understanding and hopefully seeing a little bit more about what our program is and what it looks like. And I have listed here my email address for folks to contact me following this presentation if they have more questions and they want specific links to parts of our webpage that go into more detail on other programs, such as our waste containerization or our commercial waste, for waste that's dealt with by businesses, or any other thing like that at the department. We're a large agency, so some of the aspects of this work that are done by different teams, whereas I work on the residential side of things. But I am very knowledgeable about all of the different types of things that we are working on as we work towards, cleaning up the city and making it healthy and safe and clean for everyone.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew. That was a wonderful presentation. And I'm always reminded, after spending time away from New York, I'm always reminded of how the scale changes when you're dealing with 8.5 million people and reaching all of those different communities and all the different kind of housing stock and building, etc. So it's really, it's a good reminder of the diverse kind of work that needs to happen in a singular place, like New York City. So with that, I'd like to open up the floor to any questions that people might have. Feel free to deposit them in the chat box or raise your hand. It looks like Karen just raised her hand, so maybe let's start with Karen.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I mean, you answered most of the question which came up in between, but I'm very interested, for example, in this yard waste mandates, because it's a big deal with a lot of those mandates and bills, the execution part. So you say that there will be a fine for non-participation. Like, how are you planning to deal with it, or are the, because with 8.5 million people, to keep track of every single home will be kind of a challenge, and also there must be an entire entity dealing with finding people. No? Like, it's a bit. And in this context, also, how is actually the waste taxation in general? Is it a general waste fee, or is it
right.
a tax, or is it? Is there any option for having something like pay as you throw? So that would also be an incentive for separate collection. Okay.
Thanks, Karen. Those are great questions. I'll start with the second one first because I think that's important. And I'm sorry I didn't mention that, but no, in New York City, residents do not pay for waste. It's a very foreign concept here. There's not any, it's not directly paid for. There's not a bill, right? It's within the tax base. So the funding for the City of New York's Department of Sanitation comes out of the general fund that, we are provided our budget. I believe we're a little over $1 billion budget annually. That means that we get our resources from that. We don't directly charge an individual, and you see that what that means, right? The incentive to recycle and compost isn't there as it is in some other municipalities where it's like, oh, recycling and composting is free or at a discount, and I have to pay for every single gram of waste that I'm putting at the curb or dropping off. It's not the case. There have been some attempts. It's a very challenge. The political struggle, which I'm a municipal worker. I won't get into politics of the struggle of too much around pay as you throw or save as you throw is what has been called here, but it has been studied here and it's continued to be studied here. Given the housing stock and how it looks, I think that's one of the challenges, and also dumping, environmental dumping, right? Oh, I don't want to pay for that. I'm going to take this to my neighbor's house and plop it in front of their house. That's one of the things that's been cautioned of. Onto your other part of the question, how do we do this? How will we fine? Well, some details on the bill. Well, first, we do have enforcement. There is an enforcement team within the Department of Sanitation. The enforcement team, they can ticket already for recycling, right? If you're not, recycling is in the law and you do have to participate in recycling. The enforcement agents, they basically look at a building and they look, okay, I see that there are only black trash bags out. Why do I not see any of the recycling containers out? And they can essentially study the look of the building and the facade and say, okay, I only see trash is set out, but it's a recycling day. I should see recyclables. And they can then, effectively survey or investigate the scenario. For leaf and yard waste, there'll basically be different increments of fines for when a building would be observed and it would not have leaf and yard waste set out. $25 for the first infraction, and then increasing double, so $50 for the second time, $100 for future violations within that year for 1 to 9 unit buildings. And then as we look at higher unit buildings, sort of more of the multi-unit buildings, they can get $100 fine for the first violation, $200 for the second violation, and $300 for the third violation, and continue to be at $300 for the rest of that year. So it's a real, to the individual. Say you live in it's your own home and you get $200 fine. That's a lot of money, right? For just not putting your yard waste out. And you could get that every single week, right, for the entire year. That could be, $5,000 by the end of the year. So that we're trying to really be tough here, and show that it's important and that you can participate in this free program alternatively, right?
All right. With that, maybe we can continue on to Stefan. I think I saw your hand up next.
Thank you very much. I'm Stefan from the European Compost Network. I have a question more on the treatment side. So you showed 2 pictures of a very large composting plant and anaerobic digestion plant. But on the other hand, you have a voluntary service, especially for food waste. Which quantities are you expecting to collect, or which quantities are you collecting at the moment? And how are you planning to maybe expand treatment capacities, and which other components are you using composting on site, for example, or in the anaerobic digestion plant? Would it be a co-digestion with wastewater, or which materials are you using as well?
Yeah, so your question has there's a lot of points to your question. The Department of Sanitation manages in the city limits, we manage 2 compost facilities. And the way that waste is set up in New York City, we have what's called borough equity. And so we have to make sure that the waste that's managed is managed in a way that we won't send compostable material to be composted in another borough. So material from Queens won't go to the compost facility that I showed in Staten Island. It is this facility that, that is just in the rules of New York. So that is why the material has gone to the Newtown Creek Egg Digesters facility, or the facility that was outside of the state in in Massachusetts, basically, is where the location was. Material from Queens wouldn't be going to those smaller community composting setups that was located with some of the partners that we work with. Those sites, they manage on a much smaller threshold, right? We in Queens, we were collecting about 12,000 pounds of material, a little over 6,000 tons of material in 3 months of collection, and that's about the standard that we do collect and process. But that material is being sent for anaerobic digestion. So we're looking for those type of thresholds in Brooklyn as well. Close to 6 tons per quarter, but it could be higher. There's certainly more waste than that, but we're looking for those type of numbers. However, that material isn't being, I want to be clear, that material isn't being sent to a composting facility in Brooklyn. It's going to one of the facilities that we have for AD. The community composting setups that I was showing you, those slides of, they're collecting material from residential drop-offs, and they can process that material at their compost sites, but they're just massively different scales. I believe 200 tons per year is the collection of the full compost network. So just different numbers, right? Close to 2,000 tons per month on one borough's collection versus 200 tons per year of organic waste. Still important. I want to make sure that that's also understood, because this is all voluntary right now, right? I mean, minus the leaf and yards, which just literally just came into place, but this has all been voluntary. And so the fact that we're still collecting such a large quantity of material from a voluntary side and also on a citywide program, it's really important. And we're hoping that these just continue to expand as both the service expands for curbside and also the service expands with the drop-off networks that are available as well.
All right, thank you for that. And Gemma?
Hello, this is Gemma from PensamENTs. Thank you for the presentation. Andrew, can you explain what specific design the campaign and the service will have for Manhattan because of the complexity of the neighborhood, the zone?
So if I understand your question correctly, it's how will Manhattan,
See,
will
how,
it look any different?
how are you going to design the service and the campaign, the implementation in Manhattan because of the complexity and the different activities and then type of streets and so on?
Yeah, no, that's I'm glad that Manhattan's a year away, to be totally honest, because it's the most complicated as far as the housing stock and the number of people and the space that's allowed, really. To be certain, Manhattan already has a higher frequency of service. So just generally, just off the bat, in the other parts of the city that I was talking about, specifically in Queens, they only have there are 2 trash collection days a week, and then there's 1 recycling day collection a week. In Manhattan, there are 3 collection days a week for waste. And when we had curbside composting service in those pilot neighborhoods in Manhattan, we also offered it 3 times a week. So there was 3 times the level of collection of service to manage the density issue. I won't be the one making the decision on how often the collection will be offered, but that I would be thinking that we're going to go in that direction as well when service starts, so that we'd have to have the higher level of collection of service, which we already do for waste and recycling in that borough. There was also if you look at the drop-off network of the food scrap drop-offs, the locations where residents can take their food scraps, a large focus has been in Manhattan. So while there will be curbside composting service within the borough, there is also still will be the ability for individuals to drop off their food scraps at either staffed drop-off locations or unstaffed smart bins, quote unquote, is what we call them, where they're bins that are operated by a key fob or an app. All operated by an app to open up the bin, and the waste is containerized. There are, as I mentioned just briefly, and you can find more details on our website, some pilot studies right now as well being done for effectively clean curbs or containerizing all the waste on a block to have daily collection service for these areas, right? And so we're looking at different strategies that could be implemented in parts of the borough to solve that issue once we're there. I mean, it's going to be there, and just like that, right? But as far as collecting brown bins or curbside composting bins at the corner, in the past we've done it with multiple collection days per the week, and I would think that that's what we'd be offering again in Manhattan in the future.
All right, thank you. I actually wanted to take a moment to ask a question of my own. So I think you mentioned 10,000 uniformed workers on the streets, and the difference in the Department of Sanitation between uniformed and civilian, the uniformed being those who are actually physically picking up the trash. So on one hand, we have the outreach to the greater society, and I'm wondering how the inreach went with this most recent rollout to the inreach to these 10,000 workers who are the eyes and ears and hands of the project and program.
Great, yeah, no, inreach or outreach to the actual audience of Department of Sanitation staff has been a huge part of rolling out and making a successful launch of this program. There have been as many touch points to that audience as there have been to the, I didn't show that part of the slide really only focused on what we've done for the community outreach, but we've done requests for staff to be involved in the program actually through departmental messages, where there'll be a message that goes out to every single uniformed staff person to inform them of the composting program rollout and what to participate, and that they can sign up and volunteer to do some of the outreach that's involved in it. There'll be trainings and messages at the garage level to actually where the uniform workers start their day, and during those days an individual can will talk to the sanitation workers and encourage them, like, this is the new program, this is what we're talking about, to the residents. And that information, because it's a rank and file look, the actual superintendents or the garage supervisors basically will be the ones encouraging and telling, this is what the new program is, this is how it's rolling out. Our commissioner of the agency, she will go to the garages and talk to the staff there and the men and women of the department and tell them, this is what's happening, this is the type of program and how it's going to roll out, and make sure that they're aware. And I think it can go, it's important. I'll definitely say that it's important to have internal buy-in from the staff that are there. They are compensated, for the work that they are doing, but also trying to understand it and say, like, why are we doing this now? Because I've been doing this job for 30 years and we've collected this as garbage, and now it's all of a sudden it's going in a different bin. They have to have their buy-in as well. So that's why that's part of the program. It's very critical, right? Because they're also, every single sanitation worker, they're the ones who are also collecting at the curb every day and talking to residents who might be answering questions. They might be a focal point of this program. It's important to get their buy-in and their leadership in it as well.
All right, and with the hour quickly approaching, maybe we can take one more question. Maybe it looks like Karen has another question.
Yeah, like I'm really interested in how waste collection in general works in New York City. I'm afraid this question is not bio-waste focused, because you said that already for a long time now you're fining for non-participation in recycling in general. So what are you collecting? A paper fraction and then the other recyclables are all together? And these kind of fines for all these high-rise buildings must be quite tricky, because some floors might not participate, others do, and then they might fight in between them. Why am I fined? It's just fault of, I don't know.
Yeah, no, it is tricky for those buildings to figure it out. I mean, it is the law in New York City that residents have to recycle the material. It's not that the labor has to get pushed over to now the building manager, the building super. It is in the law. Many people don't know that, however, or many people don't care to follow that. So a lot of times the building management or the building staff will sort the recyclables for the tenants, trying to avoid a ticket, right? Because the ticket's going to be eaten or will be, managed by the building. It's not going, like, that cost is going to get divided by the number of units in the building, right? But I have seen some things where buildings do require their tenants to sign a document saying, hey, we do know that recycling is a law and we will participate in recycling as best as we can. You do have moments where the building staff will knock on someone's door and say, hey, I know that this is your banana peel that should have been in the compost bin and not in the recycling bin. But also I think that tickets are a reality, right? And they very much are. And it's one of the tools that we have to try to change behavior. And so that's continued throughout different parts of the city, to the point that I think it scares building staff enough to try to change, like, do some of the sorting for the tenants, even though it's not their job to do it, but management has made them sort of adopt that approach.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah,
Well,
Ignacy.
thank you, everyone. If that was my last question, my email again, ahoyles@dsny.nyc.gov. If there's other questions, I'd hope that you could, shoot me an email and I can address them that way.
Perhaps Andrew, do you have time for one more question at the moment?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ignacy.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Andrew. Very, very interesting presentation. This is Ignacy, also from ENT. I wonder if you could say some words about commercial collection of organic waste. It seems like it's a bit of low-hanging fruit maybe there, and I wonder whether you already started this type of collection, and if you can provide some insights. Thanks.
Yeah, so Department of Sanitation, to be clear, we do not collect their waste. I think that's understood, or I hope that's understood. We manage, along with another agency, the sort of rules that go into how businesses have to set out their waste and how it's collected and when it's collected, right? So it is private carters do all the collection of businesses. We have set rules, however, for that same type of containerization of waste. So we've made rules now that all, that for organics, we've made an organics law, so that certain basically